Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, I have John Hall here today. Hi, John.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so everybody knows John is the co-founder of Calendar.com. He's a strategic advisor to Relevance and author of Top of Mind, the book. And he's also a columnist at Forbes and Inc. So I don't really know how you do it all. You must be crazy busy.
I have a lot of good people around me that help. So it's not just me, so it makes it easier.
Okay, that's a good answer. So speaking of, you write a lot about productivity and time management. So, we are going to talk about SEO and PR and actually how thought leadership kind of falls into that. But first, I want to just hear a little bit about any of time management advice, especially in this era of work from home and then digital teams.
Yeah, for me, it's the simplest advice is just time boxing. So time boxing is nothing new, some people say time blocking, but if you type in time boxing in HBR, there's an article about how that strategy is one of, I think they did a study of the 100 most productive habits or tactics or strategies, and time boxing came up number one pretty strongly. And the reason why is because time boxing is a great way to actually schedule out your time, not only for so you allocate a certain amount of time for projects, but you also give yourselves the mental breaks that you need throughout the day. So, for example, if you look at my schedule, it has this. And then actually my daughters are in the office. So after this, I have a 30-minute break just to play with my daughters, give myself a mental break for work, and then right back to, work. And then I come back a little stronger. But during that time, I'm actually mentally disconnected from work. And so time boxing is such an important habit because once again, it gives you I have 30 minutes to get this done. I have an hour to get this done. I'm allocating this time. And it also helps you be very goal oriented with your time while timing the things that you need to give yourself those breaks. So I would say that that's a key thing as we rolled out Calendar.com, the people who were using the tool a lot were a lot more productive because they were scheduling out their day. They were a lot more organized with things. And then in addition, they also were just mentally stronger. And so for us, and when I mean mentally strong, they dedicated more time to create kind of a balance. And so I think that, for me, it's very simple is that, try and implement some form of time boxing, get, a tool. It doesn't have to be ours necessarily, but get some sort of a tool to, schedule and allocate certain amounts of time, and then also track it. Have some sort of analytic function where you look back and say, hey, how did I do this last week with spending my time, with blocking off the right amounts, and learn from it and become better.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. I've heard of both concepts, of course, time blocking and then needing mental breaks, but I didn't really think of them together as a reason to do that.
Well, it's just being more thoughtful of your time. Time blocking is you're being more thoughtful. If someone's more thoughtful of their time, typically they naturally build those things in. It's when your schedule gets taken over by everybody else and that you feel like you're just all over the place, that's when you're not even thoughtful. So I would say the key thing is just being more thoughtful and strategic about how you spend your time and reflect on that and just keep getting better.
Yeah, and don't just wake up and do your emails because the emails just direct your day rather than you being in control of your day.
Exactly.
So not to be a commercial for calendar.com, but I'm just curious so quickly, so you can do more. So what is the difference between calendar.com and then Calendly? And then is it that you can do other things like time blocking in there?
Sure. Well, Calendly, it's a good tool. We get along with those, the company, being in the same industry, and they're a tool that it's fairly specific just to scheduling, and it doesn't go cross platforms. A lot of times, we're a unified calendar, so we actually have where I can pull my wife's Google Calendar, I can pull my calendar in, and I have a central place to have my availability, so that like I actually have a very good view of my time. Calendly is a very good scheduling tool for us. We wanted to be a very good scheduling tool, but we also wanted to have the data behind the calendar so we could do analytics, so we could do different things, beyond scheduling. Because for me, it was just the way I was managing my time. I was using like 13 tools. Calendly was one of the tools I was using, honestly. So I was using Calendly, I was using Mixmax, I was using like 4 or 5 other ones. I'm trying to think. Oh, TimeBridge, but we actually bought them. Then I was also using like HubSpot, and so it was just this intermingle of things. So for me, I just try and say, hey, like if you can limit the tools you're using, there's more of a chance you're going to actually use them. And so that's kind of where I like Calendly as a tool. We're more of a full functioning calendar with scheduling, and we're building out analytics right now.
And then do you have a time tracking function in calendar.com? Is that what I'm hearing?
More towards time tracking. We did look at that, more towards just how you're scheduling your meetings, how many meetings you're scheduling, are they effective? We have a tool right now that we're releasing that is called Meeting Ranker, which it's basically everybody who's in a meeting with you, they get the follow-up email where it's like, oh, here's a summary of the email, but it also says rate this meeting. So then you get an idea on like actually how effective you are in your meetings. Because I always wonder when I'm in meetings, like if it was actually valuable, if people thought it was useful. And so I think that for me, it's less about time tracking and more of like allocating of like time and actually scheduling things out and then seeing how many meetings, how long they were, and things like that. Time tracking is just to get people to actually do it and like actually hitting a button, stop it. It's very hard to create a habit where everyone's doing that. And so we've kind of steered clear of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I could talk to you all day about this actually, but
Sure.
I think
it applies to a lot of people. So it's very easy to have a conversation on an airplane about it.
Well, we definitely need, I mean, in PR or any service industry, especially if you have a lot of accounts, you really do need to be thoughtful about where you put your time, and you can't over deliver. I mean, let's over deliver, right, for a client, but time wise, you can't spend too much time as well. And so that's where being thoughtful helps. But speaking of thoughtfulness, let's move on to thought leadership. So earlier you were doing a presentation for SEMrush, I think, and you had a Venn diagram of SEO and PR and the convergence of that. And we've talked about that. But what about, you have thought leadership with digital thought leadership in the center. So can you just talk about that and how thought leadership is becoming so important to SEO and PR?
Well, it's more just the overlapping of these 3 areas because, like, for example, like the PR side of things, like it's really hard these days to get good PR without the thought leadership aspect to it. Because, like, I'll give you an example. Like Inc. Is a place I write for. They've started editing out my stuff, like my things, like when I'm mentioning companies, when I'm quoting people, unless it's sourced by a thought leadership, stat, data, unique experience. Like if I just quote, like I'd love to quote, you're smart, you're a nice person. But if you just say, hey, like every company should have PR because of blank, those things are starting to be stripped because in reality is that the way that people or media outlets are having to go to is they're having to go, hey, like if you're going to source, if you're going to use people as examples, they need to actually be leaders. It can't be just, this person who just hired a PR firm. And so for us, I try and encourage people. I say, guys, like, like the company that you mentioned earlier that I advised, Relevance, like their whole positioning is own your industry, and when I think of thought leadership, that's a part of owning your industry. Great, you can have great products, you can have great people, but you also need to commit to saying, hey, we're going to be a true leader in this space. We're going to get people good information. We're going to earn their trust so that they're coming to us when they're needing things, when they have a challenge in the space. We are a source for information, and that fuels PR because you're ultimately, that's what is being sourced, and that's what others will start naturally sourcing. And it makes PR firms like yours and the one I advise, it makes it so that we can be kind of rock stars for them, and actually be a catalyst to, their branding and actually build things out. And then you have SEO on top of that where, I think everything is, I'm talking to people from Google very frequently, and Google, you can't really game them anymore. That's why PR is like, you're starting to see a lot of SEO budgets go into the PR realm because of the fact that Google has become smarter and smarter. I hear they have very smart people over there, so it's harder and harder to kind of do hack and black hat tricks and things like that. So PR and thought leadership, when you kind of combine those two, where you're getting good information out there, it's getting on site and media attention. Other people are talking about it. Google looks at that as, wow, this is actually like, just think about it. Google's goal is to obviously make money, but also be the best source when people are searching for information. So if your company is being a thought leader and you're actually getting good information, good data, good stats, good examples, and then people are talking about that, Google is going to reward you because that's the way they're going. They're saying, oh, this is a true source for information. And so that's why they're interlapping so much these days. And that's why if you want to own and have more industry ownership, you kind of have to combine the three really, really well so that they work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but later I do want to talk about just how to be a thought leader and where to start. But getting into the weeds. So, okay, you've got your editors at Inc. Now, and you say you quote someone. Now they might take it out because the person's not a thought leader. How do they know? How does the Inc. editor know? Do they just go to Google and see, oh, they don't have a lot of articles about them, and then they take it out? Like, how do you even?
No, I mean, what editors, and this isn't just, Inc. was just the example because I had a recent example with them, but this is across the board where media outlets, they have been under fire, obviously, with the political challenges that you had last year in media and a lack of trust in media. They have to be very careful with what information they're sourcing. And so from a standpoint of, what they're taking out, they're taking things out, and this is editors across the board, that don't actually add true value to the article. And we got away, honestly, in the PR realm, we got away for 10, 15 years of just getting people mentioned. Getting people mentioned, and it was like, let's say, semi-valuable. It kind of maybe hit the point a little bit, but didn't really drive it home, or it could have been better. And so I think that from the standpoint of what they're looking at, is they're looking at and say, can this article survive without this included? And if it's just as good without it being included, I think they're just taking it out. So, I mean, my thing would be that thought leadership aspect, create and get really good information, really good content that you have on your, on your site, on your social channel, on LinkedIn, on different channels, so that when you are being pitched by a PR firm, they're not just sending quotes, but they're saying, hey, here's a quote from this awesome leader. They've been or they've been in these places. Here is, an article where or here's an article, where that's being sourced with the information that makes that article better that they're pitching, and ultimately you building an audience. So traffic really does matter these days to media outlets, because a lot of them are going out of business. A lot of journalists are friends of mine, and they're getting fired, and they're great journalists, but they just don't have the traffic. And so, part of also that kind of element of thought leadership is not just the perception, but it's actually true influence. If you have 100,000 people that follow you, like, for example, on my LinkedIn, I now have 300,000 people following my newsletter. When I write something, a lot of times it goes on there, we share it out, and it helps with the traffic, for that PR campaign. And so, it's not, unfortunately these days, it's not just about, are you perceived as a thought leader? It's, building true influence so that when you do get covered, there's more eyes on it, draws attention, then people want to work with you. The writers do, the contributors, the editors want, and it makes a lot of sense to include you in these pieces.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of influence, we did have a question about the difference between credibility and influence, because I think we've heard you say something about that. Do you have anything to say about that?
To me, there's levels of credit of kind of this area of influence. There's perception of influence. That's somebody who just got some fee, and honestly, for some people, it makes sense just to do this. Like startups don't have a budget, and I'm like, hey, honestly, you just need the perception of credibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they truly credible? Let's be like, if it's an honest test, are they truly credible if they get a couple articles in press? Not necessarily, but it does help because it's a perception. When people are looking and looking into the company, conversions are going to go up if they have those hits. So that's that perception. Now, then you go into this other stage where, it's more credibility, where you're kind of surrounding yourself. There's quite a few articles. You're getting good content out there. When someone looks into you, they're like, wow, that's like a legit company. And that, that kind of let's say that content strategy is in place, that's doing really well. So that's kind of, to me, credibility. Then there's this element of true influence. Influence is that actually you can drive. Like, if I do something in one of my channels and something happens to change a behavior, to get sales, to get close, like, that's when you're starting to get into real influence. And that's where, you kind of have to be honest with yourself, what budget you have. If someone comes to you and they say, hey, I have a $2,000 budget and I want to real influence you, I would hope you would say, wow. No, I mean, like, let's be real. I mean, what we can do here is, let's get our minimal budget, and here's what we can do to kind of get, some good hits out here. You can use this in sales materials. You can use this here. And you have to be very real with people on where they are in the stage, because you're going to use different tactics. You're going to use different strategies depending on where they are. So when we have a company that comes to us, it's like a really, really big company that's, a lot of traffic, a lot of influence. We're doing different strategies. We're doing cross marketing with other large companies, because we know they want to deal with our client. So we're going to tap into their audiences. So when we do a PR placement somewhere, we're also going to get these other people to share it out, because we know they're trying to get on our client's good side because they have real influence. Now, if it's a startup, it's a little different, and we're having to do different strategies for that. And so you got to be very honest with clients and also yourself as a brand, is that where are we, and how are we working with our PR firm or, our internal PR people to go to that next stage? And also, what are the goals that we plan to accomplish? Because PR is not like an end all. If I get a placement, that's not the end. To me, it's how is this placement being used to increase sales, to help with recruiting, to help with investor, to help get more investors. There's so many things that PR can do for you, but you got to be honest with yourself where you are, and then also what goal you're trying to accomplish with it.
Mm-hmm. This is great. I basically have a million questions that I could insert, but into like everything you said. But so why don't you for a second talk about the content alignment strategy that I think you created that term, you call it CAS, and that has to do, well, probably more than just leveraging all PR hits, but yeah, what else does that have to do with? And what is the checklist?
Yeah, so in the SEMrush one that I did, I actually put 3 columns of PR, SEO, and thought leadership, and basically put the things that are included in, at least when we're doing a cast. So a lot of times I'm brought in to do a high level strategy for a client, where I'm saying, okay, to do a cast or a content alignment strategy, we need to look at PR, we need to look at thought leadership, we need to look at SEO, we need to look at which things in here are included. Like, for example, in that visual for the SEMrush presentation, I basically put books in there, but under thought leadership. But in reality, a lot of companies, they don't need to write a book, but it was still in there. So it's like you start off with, okay, here are all the things in these areas. And then it's like, okay, what are the primary focuses? So if somebody's getting started on thought leadership, I'm typically looking at basically a hub and spoke model, where you're saying, hey, we can't own the industry yet. So we want to start out by owning certain terms. So let's say you are a company, a banking company, and you're doing debit cards, or you're doing construction debit cards. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to say, okay, we want to own, let's look at the traffic, let's look at these things. Sweet. There's an opportunity for not debit cards. That's pretty tough to get in, just because you're dealing with some of the biggest banks in the world. But construction, let's see if we can get this. So then we're looking at, okay, what type of content, long form, really good information that people are going to really be hooked to. And then let's create a hub and spoke model around that, where you're doing blog content, you're doing social. So you're doing that actual, like, hey, let's own this, get really good pieces, let's spread it out, have that hub and spoke model, where you're doing the things around it. And then what you're doing is you're saying, okay, now, so that was kind of that thought leadership, good information that can be used to be a source for information. Then it's saying, okay, on the PR element, what sites, what makes sense here? What are relevant sites that, have this audience? And also that, once again, you're thinking of SEO at the same time, because you're aligned. What are the sites that are relevant that are going to help this rank better. So then you kind of go to the SEO side. You say, okay, well, what terms are we going to go after? So obviously, construction debit cards is a possibility if there's an opening. So you kind of keep going around that circle, and you keep building it out and saying, okay, here's how everything's playing with each other. This is playing with this. Well, this is going to help this out. And you just keep going around until you start forming and you say, okay, this is kind of the plan of, we're doing this hub and spoke model. We're going to own this. We're going to get this type of sites, these types of influencers talking about it. And we're going to be going after these keywords. And so it will change a PR strategy a little bit, because if you're going after certain keywords, you're in your pitches, you're going to use certain keywords in the hopes that the reporter is going to, or journalist or contributor is going to pick up some of those things, because ultimately Google is getting smarter, and they don't necessarily just need the links. Links are important, obviously, but at the same time, the content being around certain topics and sources, and actually being very relevant is going to help it rank. And so that's why all of this has to play together nicely. And so you have to kind of map that out and say, here's how they're working together. And then ultimately, when there is alignment, you'll see that everything feeds. You'll see the SEO rankings get better. Your PR traffic gets better because it's showing up for, more distribution on search. You also see that you're building a following because it's aligned with terms that there's an audience you're going after that wants to own, and you're building that following. And then you kind of move on to that next one is what's the next thing we want to own. So that's kind of a very simplified, obviously, typically that's taken me hours to do, but that was me explaining it in a minute.
Thank you. Well, that was great. So I do want to be respectful of your time, because I think your daughters are probably more important than this podcast, by the way. But okay, so last question. What does hiring an evolved PR firm mean? I've heard you talk about that.
So hiring an evolved PR firm is just one that is, and once again, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings who's listening, or if there is but in reality is that old models of PR are going away, and not necessarily going away. They're still surviving, but people are wanting, they're wanting actual ROI. They're wanting to say, hey, how is this going to move my business? Because 10 years ago, when I first got into it, and I started a company called Influence & Co., which we grew to a pretty large firm. When I was there at the beginning, it was pretty simple. It was like, if you get a placement, you're winning, and they're happy. I had people being like, oh, great. We're winning because, all these, you got these placements. That's changed because you had account-based marketing, you had, content marketing evolve. You have all these things evolve where people are like, what? But why are we doing this? At the same time, you had media outlets become more spread out with their, with their traffic. TechCrunch, for example, used to be able to get on there and your site would shut down. Now they have 10 articles a day and it's spread out in different channels and, things like that where, your site doesn't necessarily have to shut down. It's just a different world. And so you have to say, hey, what type of, I don't even advise any PR companies that don't have service fees with deliverables included. If somebody has a retainer, and no offense to you do it or somebody else does it, for me, there has to be clear deliverables, because unfortunately, there's a lot of large PR firms that say, we're going to charge you $200,000. It's a retainer. And to me, that model, it's very difficult for me to, and some brands like that, I just don't. The next thing is the actual evolution of the thinking of aligning these things. A lot of firms are siloed, and they basically say, hey, we do PR, and we're going to traditionally pitch, and they don't actually think about search. They don't think about, creating the right on-site content. So old traditional PR firms are having to learn more about these things, and they have to, in my opinion. So I would say that from my standpoint, the best firms are the firms that are a little more ahead of the curve with those things, because in reality, it's a differentiating game now. Now we went through this, in content marketing, we went through this whole thing, content is king. Let's say content was king/queen 10, 15 years ago. That was the same. Then distribution became more important because it got so crowded from content shock. What I believe that's what Mark Schaefer called it. And then now we're in a place where it's so important to get the right traffic at the right time and get the right kind of people paying attention to you so that it results in sales. And that's where this relevancy aspects comes. So I think that the companies and the PR firms that are going to win are going to be the ones that are reasonable about service fees, deliverables. So getting away from the models that people hated with massive retainers that I still don't actually know what the first PR firm that I ever hired, I still don't know what they did. It was like 15 grand, still don't know what they did. And that was on me. I was a young person. I didn't know what was going on.
Not necessarily.
So you have the service fees there. Then you have the way of thinking and the actual strategy of combining, and also having good partners. Like we have PR partners. Like as crazy as it was, the Relevance, the company that I advise, has PR firms that they work together with, because sometimes there's got to be a firm that's better at something else. And so I think that for me, like that's why I got involved with the Relevance company, is because they really did well at saying, hey, we're going to set the service fee up the best way. We're going to understand how these things, SEO, PR, and thought leadership play together. And then lastly, we're going to also partner with people so that we bring the best to the client, whether it be partnering with a paid company or another PR firm that's stronger in a specific area. I think just doing what's right for the client. And I think that just hasn't been done in the PR industry prior.
Yeah, well, I love it. I love partnering with PR. I call it PR to PR, and it's the best kind of PR. I mean, we're only better together, right? So yeah, I really appreciate your time, and it was great. And where can people find you?
I mean, it really just depends. I mean, like LinkedIn, I have a newsletter on there that I contribute every week with different things that I just help. That I think will help people do better at their work and also just personally. So I would say, you can connect on LinkedIn if it's something that's PR related that's on the Relevance side. And so, there's a contact form on relevance.com. For calendar, I'm still actually paying attention to a lot of the customer service things just because we're still a younger company. We're growing fast, but, I can be reached there, on the productivity side. So I would say, check out calendar.com, check out relevance.com, and then the LinkedIn newsletter. And then if people reach out via LinkedIn to connect, just say, hey, listen to this, listen to the PR podcast, and, I'll make sure when I get around to it, I accept it.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. We'll include all the links in the write-up. So
great.
Thank you for your time. And it was great talking to you, and have fun playing with your daughters.
It was nice speaking with you as well.
Thanks for listening to the PR Talk podcast. Find Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, plus more PR Talk episodes at prtalk.co. And remember to subscribe, rate, and review.